Hey, what up? It's Will Maker. Today I'm going to go over the top 5 things that made the biggest impact on me as a producer and help elevate my production. These were also things that I chose to ignore in my production, and I'm sure these top 5 don't apply to everybody, but for those that it does, these were the things that helped me break through and help me up my game to the next level. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, I started with no musical background and I started out as a rapper. Initially, I was using other people's beats and instrumentals, and that was cool, but I got to a point where I wanted to craft my own sound. And I didn't want to rely or pay anyone for beats or to mix my own stuff. Eventually, I went to school for audio engineering, and I also learned how to sequence. Afterwards, I started making beats and I got into sampling. I still had no musical background, so it seemed perfect, but it also did present some challenges. I wasn't very good at adding things on top of my samples, and my bass lines were usually out of key. And that's what leads me to number 1, music theory. Speaking for myself without any formal music training, I always felt steps behind. And instead of trying to understand what I was doing, I felt if I just kept making more beats that things would change. I mean, it did help to an extent, but not as much as learning theory. Learning scales, chords, and where progressions are supposed to go, that's been a huge game changer for me. And since learning the basics, I don't feel as lost as I did before. There's also a professionalism to my beats now. Number 2 on my list is sound selection. The first time I realized how important it was, I was at a performance. Before the performance, there was another producer playing beats. I was just listening, and initially I was a little intimidated because this guy was actually like playing like songs and stuff. But as I was listening to what he was playing, I noticed that there was something that was off. All the sounds that he was using sounded like plastic. They were stock with no processing at all. I mean, they were coming from a keyboard, but still, they sounded horrible. I was still sampling at this time, so without realizing it, I didn't realize that my drums still had like good textures. A few moments later, somebody from his camp called me out and asked me if I was the producer for my group. I looked and I was like, yeah, I was, a little nervous or whatever. And he responded, let me hear something. I was like, oh, here we go. So I figured if they didn't like my beats, at least I was a rapper. So that was my excuse. So I started playing some of the beats that I had. And next thing you know, I had everyone's attention, including the other producer. And then to top it off, everybody started rapping over my beats. So there was this huge cipher going on. And then later on, my friend was like, man, that guy's beat sounded like plastic. And that was the moment that I knew that textures were important. Moving on to number 3 on the list is recording and mixing. You don't need any extra ambient sounds, especially in your vocal recordings or sounds that can be avoided. And really important, don't think that you can fix everything in the mix. You should always try to get the cleanest recording possible. The better that you can get the recording, the better that it's going to sound when it's mixed. Keep in mind, you can't polish a turd. And as far as mixing, learning simple things like gain staging, balance, and what certain frequencies can do, it goes a long way. Mixing can take a long time to learn, but I definitely recommend learning basics as a producer. I even find a properly gain stage and balance mix to sound better than a lot of people's final mixes. Even at a beginner level, learning the basics of mixing can take your beats from sounding very amateurish to a good sounding demo. Number 4 is going to be transitions and drops. This can be something as simple as letting your drums drop right before a hook or just letting the drums drop in the hook. Learning how to go from section to section and adding transitions into my songs has definitely added another layer to my production. If you think about a lot of the songs you love, they usually start with an intro that transitions into a good verse or a hook. And properly done, it helps add build up and adds tension to your songs. A lot of songwriters look for the drop, so learning those transitions from intro to verse to hook, those are going to be the things that help elevate your production. So learning to use risers, fills, chord changes, these are the things that are going to take your beats and transition them into songs. Lastly, number 5 is going to be opportunity. If you don't put yourself out there, nothing is ever going to happen and nothing is ever going to be heard. So take advantage of all your opportunities. So sometimes you do need to focus on those unfinished songs and beats that you do have instead of starting a new beat. Your hard work tweaking all the snares and kicks, it needs to be heard. And especially to grow, constructive criticism is definitely something that really helps you grow. Sometimes your circles may not want to hurt your feelings, and the only way that you're really going to know is if you put it out there. Most of all, you never know when one of those beats that you put out is going to change the trajectory of your entire career. And it's usually the beat or the song you least expect, so take advantage. So when I started producing and started asking questions like, how do I get my beats to sound more full? Or how do I get my mixes to sound more professional? These were the top 5 things that I used. So if you've used these tips or if there's anything that you've used, I'd love to hear it. Please drop a comment. I initially started this channel to share some tips with a few friends and share some production and mixing techniques and whatnot. And it's actually growing a lot more than I had thought. And if there's anything that you'd like to see, please feel free to drop a comment. So, other than that, peace out.